Chapter 49. The First College Major in Magic. February 15, 1996. Office of the President, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Cambridge, Massachusetts, United States of America. Tentative course catalog for course Roman 19, Magical Technology Note. Unless stated otherwise, all classes will be held in locations accessed through MacGregor I-entry. Lettered codes will refer to locations in the four towns: D. Dana Town Hall, E. Enfield Town Hall, G. Greenwich Town Hall, H. Department of Magic Headquarters, P. Prescott Town Hall, and QS Dana Academy, Salem Witches Academy, segregated by gender, 2 instructors. Students will be allowed to cross-register at the Quabbin Academy of Sorcery if they wish and have the ability to practice magic. Classes will be offered starting in the 1996-1997 academic year. 19. Muggle-Wizard Relations and Diplomacy, HASD, requirement for all students from the class of 01 or latter units. 12 Units 309 Prerequisites, Nana Lecturer, Kirchatuva Location, 26-100 Description, a discussion of the history of Wizard-Muggle relationships over the years with lots of readings. 19.01 History of the Magical World, HASD Units, 12 Units, 309 Prerequisites, Nana Lecturers, Naggle Men / Demeter Women, Location, QS Description, a Labels History of Magic course derived from the Wizarding course History of Magic. 19.02 Magical Physics Units, 12 Units, 309 Prerequisites, 8.02 19.01 Lecturer, TBD Location, 6-120 Description. This course will cover what is known of the laws that govern magic. 19.03 Magic and Technology Units, 12 Units, 309 Prerequisites, 19.02 Lecturer, TBD Location, a Description. The course will explain what happens when magical forces interact with modern technology and why. 19.04 Magical Spells and Formula Units, 12 Units, 309 Prerequisites, 19.02 Lecturer, Kirchatuva Location, 2190, at least one foreign language course description, goes into the details various spell pronouncement and their history. 19.05 Magical Focus Units, 12 Units, 309 Prerequisites, 19.01 Lecturer, TBD Location, 2190 Description. Discuss practices wizards use to improve their focus and concentration. Some of these techniques can be used in the non-magical world as well. 19.06 Magical Transportation Units, 15 Units, 339 Prerequisites, 19.02, 8.03 Lecturer, TBD Location, D Description. Gives an overview of means of magical transportation such as portkeys and flue powder. It will cover what can and cannot be done with magical transportation. 19.07 Magical Flight Units, 12 Units, 336 Prerequisites, 19.06, 16.004 Lecturer, TBD Location, TBD Description. Goes through the aerodynamics of flight on brooms and gives further details on the history of the broom. 19.08 Magical Items and Muggles Units, 12 Units, 309 Prerequisites, 19.02 Lecturer, TBD Location, G Description. Discusses situations where Muggles and magical items come into contact with each other under unusual circumstances. For instances, why is it difficult for a Muggle to control a broom? 19.11 Wizarding Lab Counts for Lab Requirement Units, 18 Units, 312 Prerequisites, 19.03 Lecturers, TBD Men/Ariadne, Women, Location, QS Description. This is a lab to create magical compounds with the assistance of a student of the appropriate gender at the Quabbin Academy of Sorcery or the Salem Witches Academy. 19.15 Enchanting Everyday Objects Units, 12 Units, 309 Prerequisites, 19.08 Lecturer, TBD Location, P Description. Instructs the student in enchanting everyday objects safely and in a way where interaction with Muggles will not wreck the object. 19.18 Magical energy and physical energy counts for lab requirement units. 18 units, 3 312 prerequisites. 19.08 Innate wizarding abilitultura. TBD location. H description. This course will train the student in the methods needed to cause a magical object to work off of electricity and a piece of modern technology to work off of magic. 19.19 Magical enhancement units. 12 units, 309 prerequisites. 19.03 Innate wizarding abilitultura. TBD location. G description. This course will teach the student how to use magic to strengthen objects and enhance their behavior. 19.2 Magical item creation, laboratory counts for lab requirement units. 18 units, 3 312 prerequisites. 19.19 Innate wizarding abilitultura. Kirchatuva location. TBD description. Students will create their own magical items under the close supervision of a trained wizard. Note, course may be taken more than once. 19.9 Special studies in magical technology units. 12 units, 309 prerequisites. 19.2 Innate wizarding abilitultura. TBD location. TBD description. Independent research project for a wizard. Requirements to graduate with a bachelor's. 19.05, 19.06, 19.11, and 19.15. Two of the other courses may be chosen as electives. Chapter 50, Samuel the Prophet. February 18, 1996, Sedgwick Hotel, New York, United States of America. Corinne Stickney looked around the room. It only took a few seconds for the song to pop into her head. If there's something strange in your neighborhood. The ballroom was packed with religious scholars and professors of all traditions. There were Muslims, Jews, Christians, Buddhists, and believers of traditions she had never seen before. She could have sworn that one of the men was a full-blown Native American shaman. At first glance, the crowd looked like a typical gathering for a convention related to interdisciplinary religious studies. However, one thing soon stood out. About a third of the guests existed only as translucent outlines floating in midair. The televised interview of Rebecca Nurse had turned religious studies on its head. For the first time in history, the world had witnessed evidence of an afterlife. Not only that, but the ability to become a ghost was not influenced by a person's religious beliefs or piety. All the candidate needed to be, at least according to Goody Nurse, was a wizard. The Salem witch trial victim, who had just arrived and drawn a large crowd, still insisted that God had created the ghost realm to give wizards a last chance to accept the Savior before moving on. Most of the religious scholars didn't believe her, however. Why would God give wizards preferential treatment? Wouldn't he give everyone an equal chance at redemption? After all, everyone was equal in his eyes. Furthermore, if Goody Nurse's theory was correct, why would devout Christians linger in the ghost world once they had accepted the Savior? It was obvious that several traditional views of religion would have to be revamped. Several of the ghosts had been dressed in garb appropriate for the big three religions. One of the Native American spirits, on the other hand, apparently hadn't even heard of Mohammed. The program would consist of a series of question and answer sessions. Rebecca Nurse, as the best-known ghost, would get the first session. The ghost would discuss his or her experiences in the afterlife, along with anything he or she knew about the ghost realm and whether it was possible for corporeal beings to make contact with the ghosts of their loved ones and revered spiritual leaders. She would be followed by a Native American spirit named Little Cloud, who had muttered irritably about the second-tier status of the Native American peoples when told he'd be speaking after Goody Nurse. He was followed by an Aztec witch doctor who had been felled by disease during the Spanish conquest of the Americas, and who had barely managed to restrain himself from trying to throttle the spirit of a Spanish missionary who had fallen trying to Christianize the Aztecs. There would be lots to learn at this session, needless to say. Rumors had been circulating for several hours, however, that a very important figure would be joining the conference. He was supposedly going to speak at the end. All Karen knew was that it was a man from the Bible. He had come all the way from Israel to join this meeting. The Christians, of course, proclaimed that the second coming of Jesus had finally taken place. Karen was skeptical, however. Judging from what she'd heard, the man was supposedly in his 70s. Jesus been executed in his 30s. It couldn't be him. Once the last and most mysterious speaker had left the podium, all of them would be called back on stage for a communal chat with the audience. More questions and answers would be posed. Once that was done, each ghost, along with any of his friends who had happened to come with him or her, would be sent to a different ballroom to have one-on-one sessions with the participants. The status of the last speaker was apparently such that he'd been given the primary reception area as his chat room. Her thoughts were interrupted when there was a spark of flashing white light and an irritated voice burst out. "Bloody hell, madame, watch where you're going. You walked right through me." The penultimate speaker flew off the podium to tumultuous applause. His name was Peeves, and he had taken to haunting a British school of wizardry. He was notorious for goofing around with other ghosts and with the students. Supposedly, he knew Harry Potter, the juvenile wizard who had been caught in the Super Bowl commercial. The scientists still couldn't make out what or where exactly Sheol was. All they knew is that, although the ghost realm had several different names, Sheol was the most popular, primarily because that was how it was referred to in the Bible, which many of the ghosts revered. The ghosts seemed to agree with Goody Nurse in that the ghost realm was an extension of, or perhaps parallel to, the corporeal world. It had nothing to do with heaven or hell, and a couple of the ghosts mentioned, quite ruefully, that they had done things in their lives on earth which they had regretted. These ghosts had conceded that they would wind up in hell, and the ghost realm seemed much too pleasant to be hell. Several of the ghosts had allowed themselves to be scanned by scientists. The various voltmeters and other equipment picked up some unusual traces of energy, but that was it. They couldn't make head or tail out of it. They hoped that it would be of use at some point in trying to allow people to speak with their dead relatives, and or to allow people who were not wizards to enter the ghost realm. There was one speaker left, however. The room was packed. Television cameras were rolling. References to Jesus filled the room. Then a bald man with a short mustache and beard floated onto the stage. He appeared to be in his 70s and looked Semitic. The people who had been expecting Jesus looked at him, perplexed. This man appeared to be uninjured and had not suffered the trauma of a crucifixion. As far as the crowd could tell, he had died of natural causes. The man looked around the room and began muttering something in a language which sounded like a cross between Hebrew and Arabic. It suddenly dawned on people that this speaker was from so far back that he'd need an interpreter in order to communicate effectively with the crowd. A few moments went by, and a person fluent in ancient languages walked onto the stage. The ghost looked at him for a moment, perplexed, and then pointed at the crowd in confusion. Apparently the ghost had been surprised that no one understood him. The interpreter, still a bit in shock, started speaking in the ghost's language. The ghost suddenly understood what had happened and accepted the newcomer's services as an interpreter. With the translation mechanism in place, the ghost pointed at himself and started speaking. Karen could have sworn that he had heard name Endor mentioned. Don't tell me the guy was a Star Wars fan. The ghost finished speaking and turned to the interpreter. The interpreter's eyes widened and he took a deep breath. Cameras flashed everywhere. The interpreter spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to introduce the prophet Samuel. Normally he doesn't give audiences. However, the end of the statute of secrecy worried him enough that he consented to join us. He says this is the first time he's spoken to people since King Saul summoned him through the Witch of Endor." Everyone started talking at once. Christian, Muslim, and Jewish leaders all tried to outshout each other. Samuel looked a bit peeved and barked something at the crowd. The interpreter explained. "He's asking you to shut up and behave properly. He doesn't like being woken up, as Saul and the Witch of Endor found out. If you can't behave, he's going back to bed. All of religious leaders shut up simultaneously. Eventually, the interpreter tore up some paper and made them draw lots as to who spoke first. The first person was a Muslim imam. The first question was obvious. Does God exist, and have you met him? The interpreter relayed the question, and the prophet responded, I believe he exists. Where else would my prophetic ability have come from? It is certainly not of this world, or my magical abilities in general. But have you met him? Samuel shook his head. I have not physically met him, if that is what you mean. Only Moses saw him face to face, and I am nowhere near Moses in ability. However, I believe he has inspired me several times. I would have preferred that the children of Israel stay under his care and not under a unified temporal ruler. But as we all know, people can be stubborn and won't take no for an answer. The result, as we all know, was disastrous. A rabbi got the next question. What do you mean by the children of Israel? Samuel looked at the interpreter and then looked at the rabbi in puzzlement. Those who believe in the one God, of course. Why do you ask? The rabbi explained. Holy One, over the past 1,000 years, several different sets of customs have evolved for worshipping the one God. They correspond to the modern religions of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Samuel stared the rabbi. How can they be different religions if they worship the one true God? As long as they worship God and live a lifestyle derived from his teachings, they can do whatever they want. Customs can differ from place to place, but as long as worship is directed towards God, it's okay. But what happens when these three sets of customs fight among each other as to which one of them is the right way to worship him? Samuel shook his head sadly. Then the people who participate in these fights do not do so in the name of God. All these sets of customs have the same father. Cain killed Abel out of jealousy once. God will be very angry and punish anyone who tries to do it again. In the name of God, I urge everyone fighting in this manner to reconsider. There was dead silence for a minute, and Karen knew why. Finally, Samuel sighed. I didn't come here to try to discuss religious minutiae, however. We can discuss that later if you want. I came here to discuss life as a ghost and what the ghost realm of Sheol symbolizes. I'll get into that now. Samuel spent the next 10 minutes discussing the ghost realm and saying roughly the same type of stuff the other ghosts did. However, Karen and a lot of other people were already jockeying for position to ask Samuel more questions in the one-on-one sessions. Chapter 51. Flamel gets an audience. February 19, 1996, Flamel residence at Devon Great, Britain. Nicholas Flamel felt old. Granted, he had good reason to feel old. He had been born in, 1326. He was now 670. Granted, he'd stayed at age 72 for God knows how long. He still couldn't believe how the world had changed during his lifetime. The discovery of a new continent, English spanning the globe. Men walking on the moon. He thanked God every day for allowing him to witness such wonders. He had already agreed to donate his diary to the British Museum and publish an electronic version of it, with the notes on the philosopher's stone edited out, of course, when he died. It would be passed off as a diary which was continued generation after generation. He expected it to be the centerpiece of their collection, and had already spent a few years translating 6 centuries of Middle English into modern English. For most people, 7 years of boring translation would be a waste of time. For Flamel, however, it was but the blink of an eye. He wouldn't have much more time, however. He couldn't hear as well as he used to a couple of years ago after he'd gone off the elixir. His wife was complaining about arthritis. At the rate things were going, he'd be dead and gone before the turn of the millennium. He'd expected to have a good 50 or so years ahead of him, given the fact that wizards tended to live longer than ordinary folk. The various aches and pains worried him, however. Perhaps he had been unlucky in this regard and would die young. He rolled his eyes at that last expression. Him, die young. What seemed wrong here? There was a diffident knock on the door of his study. Putting down his pen, he'd finally given into modern technology and traded in his quill and parchment for a pen and paper. He looked at the door. Dr. Flamel, it's me, Hugh. Hugh DeLorean had been his apprentice a long time ago. Hugh had been part of the team which had developed the Philosopher's Stone, and he had immediately taken advantage of the discovery to convince his master to let him take advantage of it. Hugh had been born in 1349, which made him the third oldest person on the planet. Quite a reward for a mere apprentice. Hugh continued, "Sir, we've got another one coming in. This one is from some firm in South Carolina. They say they've got a proposal for you." Flamel rolled his eyes. Some cultures did not take no for an answer. In the old days, the king or pope could have just issued a decree and everyone would have listened. Unfortunately, people were much more stubborn now, and neither the queen nor pope had real power anymore. He had been stunned that the Muggles had been able to associate him with the Philosopher's Stone. What appeared to have happened is that they had started trading chocolate frog cards to learn more about wizards. Damn those eye-entry personnel, giving them to Muggles. Flamel's whole biography was plain to see on his chocolate frog card, which made him target one when it came to eternal life. Thankfully, the Muggles knew much less about his wife, and they knew nothing about Hugh. Fortunately, living for 600 years and looking like he was still in his 70s gave him a lot of ideas. He'd honed his deception skills to a sharp point over the past few centuries. He'd fooled everyone before and expected to fool the world this time as well. He nodded. "Offer him some refreshments and let him in. Remember to tell him that you're the butler, not my apprentice, and whatever you do, lie about your age." A few minutes later, Hugh returned and led a man in his 50s into the room. "Sir, this is Lawrence Green of the Herald Green Pharmaceutical Corporation. Mr. Green, this is Dr. Nicholas Flamel, my employer." Green shook Flamel's hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, sir. I've heard a lot about you." Flamel feigned surprise. "Really? You've studied Middle English literature. How fascinating. An interesting combination, pharmacology and medieval literature." Part of Flamel's disguise was to serve as the dean of the Department of Medieval Literature at a local community college. It was a clever ruse. It explained all of the old books and scrolls littering his house, and it explained his unusually good command of Middle English. Green stared at him for a moment, but eventually regained his composure. "Actually, for the time being, medieval literature is but a means to an end. There have been rumors over the years of something called the Philosopher's Stone. Supposedly it's capable of producing something called the elixir of life. We hope to bottle it as a cure for aging. Supposedly, the stone can also be used to turn lead into gold." Flamel barely suppressed a laugh. They were still thinking it could turn lead into gold. Where did they get that idea from? He'd never gotten that part of it to work. Had he been able to turn lead into gold, he'd be vacationing all over the planet. Flamel shook his head and rolled his eyes. "I'm familiar with that myth. It's just a myth, however. Alchemists had been working on it for years, including a distant ancestor of mine. No one ever succeeded in producing the Philosopher's Stone." Green shook his head. "That's not what I heard, Dr. Flamel. One of the ghosts interviewed in the United States claimed that an elixir of life existed which could prevent aging. It actually existed, sir. She was adamant about that. And the name Nicholas Flamel came up in my research through your chocolate frog cards." Flamel shrugged. "I freely admit that an alchemist named Nicholas Flamel existed. I have some of his documents. That was an easy thing to admit. He was one of my ancestors. Our family has reused the names John and Nicholas for a good 9 or 10 generations of men. I'm just another Nicholas. As far as the elixir of life and his alchemy career went, I'm afraid that, from what I've seen of my ancestors' documents, there is no reference to a working philosopher's stone. I'm sorry. But the witch was convinced it existed. She was sure of it. She probably was convinced it existed. Unfortunately, the documents here state otherwise. She was told something in error, and as you know, I'm a well-known scholar on medieval literature. Green frowned. May I see his documents? Flamel nodded. Certainly. I assume you can read Middle English. These documents date back to the 14th century. Green stared at him. Aha, Flamel thought. I didn't think so. Eventually, the pharmaceutical representative nodded. I can't, but someone in my office can. He was the one who suggested that I contact you. Flamel shook his head. I'm afraid I can't let them leave my office. The documents are quite fragile. They are also a family heirloom. The next question was obvious. May I make a copy of them? Flamel paused a minute. That will probably be okay. Let me get them. I must warn you, though, that you're not going to find anything about a working philosopher's stone. Are you sure you want them? Green nodded. Yes, considering the payoff if we get this working, it's worth it. Flamel bit back a swear. He hadn't invented the stone for financial gain. Calming himself, he nodded. Well, if you insist, let me go get them. It may take a while to find them, so please be patient. He walked past an excited Green. Once Green was out of view, he conjured up an old piece of parchment and wrote some Middle English gibberish about the philosopher's stone on it. He wrote down some instructions completely wrong, of course, and added something about an attempt to create the stone, which caused it to blow up and burn the alchemist badly. Double-checking the document to make sure it looked authentic, he aged it a bit with an aging spell and brought it back into the room. He laid the piece of parchment gingerly on the table. Do you have a portable scanner? I'd prefer that you scan it here. Look how old it is. I don't like carrying it around too much, and the copier has been on the fritz of late. As it turned out, Green did have a scanner. He scanned the document and packed the scanner up. Thank you, Dr. Flamel. You've been most helpful. Flamel shrugged. Don't mention it, Mr. Green. I don't think you're going to find anything useful here, but maybe there's something which I've overlooked. Best of luck to you. Tell me if you find anything. Green nodded. I will, Dr. Flamel. Thank you for your time. Oh, one more thing before I forget. My uncle claims to remember you from college. Where did you go to school, and when did you graduate? Flamel nearly laughed again. Another attempt to try to get him to reveal his age. Well, that wasn't going to work. Oxford, class of 46. I barely avoided being drafted for the Second World War. Green grinned. Flamel knew exactly what Green was going to do, look up the Oxford class list somehow and check if Flamel was on it. Flamel would be on it, of course. His wife had modified the class lists, so he appeared to be class of 46, and Hugh came out as class of 69. He kept his face steady, however, as Green spoke once again. Ever heard of someone named Herbert Wrexham? Flamel shrugged. I can't say that I remember him. Then again, I'm getting a bit old, and we old people start to lose our memories here and there. Where exactly did I meet Mr. Wrexham? Green looked flummoxed for a moment and eventually shook his head. Not sure. I'll have to go ask him. Flamel nodded. Do that. I'm kind of curious about it now. I'd like to talk to him again. Maybe if I saw him face to face, I'd recognize him. Green looked even more rattled. Now Green had to try to concoct a story about a fake uncle. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. In the meantime, I've got to take off. Thank you for your time, and I'll tell you if I find anything in these documents. Flamel shook Green's hand. Please do. It would be a great benefit to literature if you do, and good luck with the philosopher's stone if it really existed. With that, Green took his leave, and Flamel sat down again. A few minutes later, he heard the door slam. Hugh then walked into the room. The two 14th century men looked at each other and smiled. The word came unbidden to their mouths simultaneously. Both men started laughing like there was no tomorrow. Chapter 52, Fudge and the Sass. February 19, 1996, SAS Division C Headquarters Location, Classified Great Britain, Bloody Hell, it's Uncle Nigel. Special Agent 18, Jacob Gold spun in surprise at the announcement. Sure enough, Special Agent 8, better known as General Nigel Alexander Marcellus, had returned to visit his old stomping grounds. Nigel had been a legendary operative in his day and had done yeoman work infiltrating the Soviet infrastructure during the Cold War. Last Jacob knew, Uncle Nigel had retired and had been working in an office somewhere downtown near where the era bomb had gone off. Normally, there would be a good 30-50 men in the building. Half of them were away, however, trying to snoop on the era without being caught. A couple of them were busy interrogating someone who appeared to have been an era plant inside their unit. Dear old Seamus wasn't going to have a pleasant day, Jake feared. Of the 20 agents in the building, 9 of them immediately headed over to Uncle Nigel and started talking shop with him. Uncle Nigel had trained many of these agents, and he was respected by all of them. Nigel held up his hand to forestall the inevitable reminiscence. I'd love to catch up with you chaps, but duty calls. I've come to brief you on something which may be quite important at some point down the line. At this, everyone stopped speaking. Nigel took a deep breath and began his report. Many of you may know that I work downtown in the Canary Wharf district. What you may have not known was that I was actually working in 5 Canada Square, which was badly damaged in the attack. Was fortunate enough to be outside when the truck bomb went off. Had I been in the building at the time, I would have likely fallen to my death. As it was, I was pinned by debris and began clawing myself out. Nigel hesitated a moment. That's when a couple of blokes started waving wands and lifted the heavy beams off of me, freeing me. Jacob whistled. You actually met some of those wizards. I thought the wizard stories were some kind of misunderstanding or joke. Nigel shook his head. They're real, all right. I will vouch for them myself. Needless to say, I was surprised at first. However, they soon convinced me. I'll never forget that metal beam rising away from me with nothing supporting it. Another agent gasped. They can actually make objects levitate and do things like that. You got it, Banks. They seem to have amazing powers. Until they bring out their wands, they'll look like any other human being. Once they bring out their wand, the bad guys are going to be in big trouble. After I was freed, it occurred to me that wizards could be quite an asset in protecting Queen and country. Jacob put 2 and 2 together. You're thinking of having them join the SAS as special agents. A new voice answered. Exactly, my dear fellow. The wizards have their agents and the Muggles have theirs. Both are on the same side. It only makes sense to have them train together as a unit. Heads turned as the new person walked into the room. It was a middle-aged man in strange clothing. He was carrying a staff of some sort and had a metal visitor badge on his suit. Underneath it was his name, C. Fudge. Nigel indicated the newcomer. Fellow agents, this is His Excellency Cornelius Fudge, Minister of Magic. One of the agents looked a bit skeptical. There's a Minister of Magic. Fudge nodded. Indeed there is, young lass. Allow me to demonstrate. He brought out his wand, pointed it at the ceiling. Waving it around with a flourish, he uttered one word. Avies. A flock of birds suddenly burst from the end of the wand. The agents began babbling excitedly. One of the men swore and put his hand to his head. When he removed it, there was a white stain on it. Jacob could barely restrain a laugh. He could have sworn he heard a laugh coming out of empty space, but passed it off as an echo. Minister Fudge gestured once again with his wand, and a window opened. The birds flew out of the building and perched themselves in a tree. He then blushed slightly and pointed his wand at the targeted man's head. There was a flash, and his hair was clean. Nigel nodded and gestured once more at Fudge. Thank you, Minister, for the demonstration. Needless to say, agents, someone like Minister Fudge here would be a great asset in our reconnaissance missions, wouldn't you say? I doubt the target would have ever expected to deal with wizards. Jacob answered for the group. Hell, yes. Fudge nodded. My thoughts exactly. We wizards are capable of great things. You've only seen a fraction of what a trained aura, that is, wizard trained to spy upon and catch enemy wizards, can do. I'm nowhere near powerful enough to become an aura, and even I can cast simple spells like this. Put together some auras, and a bunch of you guys and missions are suddenly going to become much safer and much easier. Nigel looked around the room. I spoke with several of the wizards before coming here and recommended that Division C be assigned an aura as an experiment to see how well the aura and traditional units complement each other. With your permission, I'll introduce you to your aura. I assume you're all right with your role in this project. Everyone shouted their agreement. In response, Minister Fudge snapped his fingers and nearly fell over as a third man suddenly materialized in the room. Grinning, he saluted the agents and pointed at a piece of fabric in his hand. Invisibility cloak, gentlemen. I was there the whole time. I must say, Cornelius, I've never seen one of the birds relieve itself on a person's head before. Dawlish is my name, and justice is my game. Jacob couldn't believe it. An invisibility cloak. Spying would become so much easier. Fudge clapped his hands and indicated the newcomer. This chap here is John Dawlish, a trained aura. He'll be working with you guys. Nigel and I have developed some training exercises, and we'll see how well they work out. Judging from the reaction Dawlish was getting from the rest of the agents, Jacob doubted that there would be any problems making the aura part of their fellowship. Nigel raised his hand once again, and all of the agents stopped talking, including Dawlish. There is another thing to consider, however. These combined wizard/SAS task forces are going to be spying on both wizards and muggles. Your opponent may attempt to use magic against you now that their world is out in the open. The aura will help defend you against this magic. I suspect that you will still have an advantage. On the other hand, as wizards aren't expecting to be shadowed with muggles and their fancy technology. Combine magic and technology, and you'll get an unbeatable combination. Please keep this in mind when you go about your missions. There are at least 2 wizards around who have been known to kill muggles. We're going to want to go after them at some point. Their names are Sirius Black, who rumor claims is a wizard, and Tom Marvolo Riddle. The latter often goes by aliases, such as Lord Voldemort, the Dark Lord, you know who, and he who must not be named. Of these 2 people, Riddle is much more dangerous. At the mention of Riddle's name, Minister Fudge blanched and shook his head. Clearly, Fudge recognized the evil wizard's name. Nigel continued. Both of these men have been seen recently. Sirius Black escaped from prison 2 years ago, and Mr. Riddle was spotted back in May or thereabouts. Minister Fudge cleared his throat as Dawlish's eyes shot up. Mr. Marcellus, where exactly did you get this information? It appears to be in error. Last time I checked, you know who was out of the way permanently. Sirius Black, however, is indeed at large, and we would appreciate help catching him. Nigel looked at the minister, confused. Who told me about Riddle? Why, the blokes who rescued me told me. Chaps named Weasley and Catamole. Are you saying that this he has already been dealt with? Fudge nodded. As far as I know, yes. However, to be fair to Messrs. Weasley and Catamole, he was an extremely dangerous wizard. When you're dealing with people like him, people tend to spread rumors, and even the best can fall victim to them. Rest assured, Mr. Marcellus. You know who is out of the way. Nigel nodded, and Jacob breathed a sigh of relief. One fewer enemy to deal with. That's good to know. All right, forget Riddle. However, Black is still out there, and you're going to have to deal with him. Dawlish here has some information on this particular wizard, which will help you track him down and hopefully catch him. Keep in mind, however, that he can turn into a dog. The agent stared at him, John included. A dog. Yes, a dog. Wizards often develop the ability to transform into an animal. It's good for disguises. The agents perked up at this again. Jacob wondered what it would be like to walk around as a dog. It would help his career a lot. Fudge looked at his watch. Blimey, I've got to go. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to talk to Dawlish. Nigel has also volunteered to return to work as well, at least until the damage to 5 Canada Square is repaired and his brokerage reopens. Good luck with your new mission, and may the magic be with you as you hunt down Sirius Black. With that, the minister disappeared, and all eyes turned to Dawlish. Chapter 53. Akio Usenet. February 19, 1996, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry England. The word had gone out from Dumbledore's office a few minutes ago. The Muggle surprise was ready, and all prefects were going to be allowed to visit the headmaster's office to see it in action. There had been rumors circulating about the nature of the surprise for a long time. Supposedly, it was a piece of Muggle technology which Dumbledore had adapted to work off of magic. Hermione had to manually restrain Ron from telling his father, as it was likely that, given Arthur Weasley's infatuation with Muggles, the man would not be able to sleep until he got his hands on the object. For the first time in many a moon, Ron didn't mind being called a Weasley. His father had rescued several people during an attack on a Muggle building in downtown London. The mayor had personally thanked him and had given him and his fellow rescuers the keys to the city. The Muggles were slowly realizing that the witches would be a great boon to human society general. Apparently, one of the men who had been rescued by Ron's father had been a former elite soldier. This man, someone named Nigel something or other, had realized that wizards could use their abilities to defend Britain from terrorists and other attackers. Supposedly, plans were being made to merge the auras into the British constabulary or something like that. Ron's father had had Nigel over for meals several times since the attack, and the old warrior had been floored by the power of magic each time he'd come. There was trouble in paradise, however. Supposedly, his father had blurted out the fact that Voldemort had returned to Nigel while he was effectively operating as a member of the Ministry of Magic. Cornelius Fudge hadn't been particularly thrilled about that. Fudge had reprimanded Arthur Weasley several times. The only thing that had kept his father out of Azkaban was the fact that he had become a Muggle hero. If word were to leak out that London's favorite son had been incarcerated for disagreeing with the Minister of Magic, the fallout would likely make an attack by the Death Eaters look tame by comparison. Ron never thought that he'd have a father who was loved by the Muggles, respected by Dumbledore, and hated by the Ministry. It was enough to give him a headache. He'd received several letters from Harry over the past few weeks. Unable to attend lessons at school, Harry was being homeschooled by Ron's mother. He was a bit peeved that he couldn't visit his friends, but house arrest was house arrest, regardless of how specious the accusation had been. She wasn't as good a teacher as McGonagall, Hagrid, or even Snape. However, it was better than nothing. The only thing Harry was concerned about was the possibility of owls. Homeschooling by a housewife did not prepare a student for a possible career as an aura. Ron and Hermione were far too busy to visit Harry. The lecturers were overdosing them with homework. Dolores Umbridge had effectively installed herself as dictator, and the inquisitorial squad was watching everything they did. As if that were not bad enough, Harry's departure forced the leadership of Dumbledore's army onto Ron and Hermione. Both Hermione and Ron had asked McGonagall to let them borrow some time-turners. McGonagall had refused, however, saying that Hermione had overworked herself 2 years earlier, and Ron was a bit too mischievous to be trusted with such a powerful item. This forced them to make do with what they had. A 5-hour sleep was a blessing for both of them. They had to add to this their prefect duties as well, which were plentiful. Yes, they got to use the special prefect's bathroom, but it wasn't worth all the hassle. Both Ron and Hermione wondered if getting a chance to see the Muggle surprise was worth all the stress of being a prefect. Hoping for the best, they headed over to the headmaster's tower and let the staircase carry them up to Dumbledore's office. All of the professors were there, as well as the 6 other prefects. Snape glared at them and started trying to take points from Gryffindor because they were late. Dumbledore glared at him, however, and he wisely shut up. The headmaster had cleared all of the little machines off of his desk. Or had he? Gingerly, Ron reached over to the desk and touched where the machines would have been. He felt cloth, and suddenly things clicked into place. Dumbledore, noticing this, grinned but shook his head. So, Ron thought, that's what happened to Harry's invisibility cloak. The portraits on the wall had apparently seen the object and were moving around excitedly. Dumbledore told them to keep quiet so that he could surprise the rest of the staff. The warning was unnecessary, however. A few of the portraits mentioned that they'd never seen anything like this before. This made sense, Dumbledore replied, since the object was created by Muggles. Looking around the room one last time, he made sure that everyone was here. He clapped his hands a few times to get everyone's attention. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming and helping us celebrate the addition of this new object to our school. From what I've been told about it, it will be quite useful in helping us solve problems and remember things. I must say, however, that I still have absolutely no idea how to use the fool thing. However, we are fortunate in that we have Miss Granger here. I believe that she is specially qualified to teach us how to use this object. Snape rolled his eyes. Headmaster, we know she is a bit of a know-it-all, but I doubt that she... Dumbledore turned to Snape and responded in an even tone of voice. She was raised by Muggles, Severus. She has probably used objects like this before. If anyone can show us how to use this object, it's Miss Granger. Hermione stared at Dumbledore with mixed emotions. Sir, I'm flattered by your suggestion, but I'm a bit swamped right now. I don't think now would be a good time for me to do this. I've got some extra work I have to catch up on. Dumbledore smiled. Mr. Longbottom will help you with your extra work. I've spoken to him about it. You can spend time training us how to use this. Ron assumed that Dumbledore was referring to Dumbledore's army. With Umbridge in the room, however, there was no way he would be able to admit it and get away with it. Snape snorted and Umbridge joined him. Longbottom, helping Granger, what? Get D's. In response, Professor McGonagall smiled. I don't think Longbottom will be able to help her get D's. I doubt that his assistance will reduce her grades to anything below an E. Hermione ignored Snape's comment and continued staring at Dumbledore. Sir, there are lots of instances of Muggle technology which I am not familiar with. I haven't driven a car before, for example. Dumbledore shrugged and got up. I suspect you'll be familiar with this, however. Now, Miss Granger, would you be so good as to sit behind the desk in the operator's position? He gestured to the chair he had been sitting in. Nervous, Hermione sat down and faced the empty area on the desk. She tried to calm herself and told Dumbledore she was ready. With that, Dumbledore put his hand on the invisibility cloak, counted to 3, and pulled it away. For the first time, the staff and students of Hogwarts got to see what had been under the cloak. Most of the staff couldn't identify it. It consisted of 5 pieces: a large standalone object with a black panel in front, a large box, a small object about the size of a fist, something which had a piece of paper coming out of it, and a small tablet with images of letters and strange symbols on it. Ron had never seen anything like this before and scratched his head. What the hell is this? Hermione, however, just looked at the object. A few seconds later, a huge smile spread across her face. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. Are you familiar with this type of object, Miss Granger? Hermione pulled up closer to the object. Indeed, I am, Professor. Where did you get it? It was a gift from the Prime Minister. He delivered it to me after he visited. It's been configured to run off magic instead of electricity. Start using it, it should work fine. Grinning, Hermione started pushing buttons on the various pieces of the object. Various lights turned on, and the black panel suddenly flickered and began displaying a word. McGonagall looked at the word and then outside. Windows. What do windows have to do with this? Hermione explained. Professor, let me explain what this is. This object is called a computer. It can be used to store information electronically without use for scrolls or other physical forms. If you want to retrieve the information, you can have it bring it back for you so you can see it again. You can then write out multiple copies of it using this object over here, called a printer. In theory, you should be able to store your entire library on this box. Filch stared at it. He may have been a squib, but he hadn't grown up with Muggles. Amazing. She grasped the object the size of a fist, moved it around, and pushed some buttons. This is a word processor. You can write little notes in here and save it so you can retrieve them later. See, I'm going to write my name. Watch this. She pressed some buttons, and the word Hermione appeared on the word processor. Hermione pointed at the panel and continued. This will be useful for storing the steps required to cast complex spells. That way, you will be able to bring them up even if you don't have a remembrall or a pensive. McGonagall frowned. That sounds dangerous. Won't people start using this device as a crutch, entrusting all their memories to this object? What happens if they have to cast a complex spell without this object at their side? Hermione shrugged. Keep the computer in this office. That way, no one will be able to cheat. Ladies and gentlemen, I truly believe that this will be a great asset for Wait. What is this? Unbidden, buttons on the tablet with the letters and symbols suddenly began moving up and down. Soon, additional letters appeared on the word processor. Hermione lifted her hands from the keyboard, but the letters kept on coming. The screen now read. Umbridge Jasatost Facejet. Dola's Umbridge, however, was not particularly pleased. Gritting her teeth, she reached behind the computer, felt around for a little, and suddenly grabbed something. Fred Weasley suddenly appeared as his invisibility cloak was removed. He had been pressing the buttons on the tablet. He smiled and pointed at the computer. Yes, its use seems obvious. Press the symbols on the tablet and the equivalent symbols appear on the word processor. Even a defense against the dark arts teacher can figure that out. Furious, the High Inquisitor pointed her wand at Fred and shoved him out of the room. As soon as she left, the rest of the staff began nodding in quiet agreement. Chapter 54. Nobody Calls Me Chicken. Update 54, February 19, 1996, Sanders, Residence of Prescott, Arizona, United States of America. The air punctuated by a sharp crack, followed by a deep, "Good morning, Mr. Sanders." Isaac Sanders jumped and raised his hands in surprise. The coffee spilled out of his mug and onto his hand. It didn't scald him, but it was still quite hot. He put down the mug, rushed over to the sink, and washed it off. Swearing, he spun around to see where the voice had come from. He rolled his eyes when he saw who it was. "Strong Bear, where the hell did you come from? The fireplace isn't in this room." Strong Bear shrugged. "I apparated in." "You what?" "Apparated. You would say teleported. I just transported myself from Fourth Mesa to here. It's another method wizards use to travel from place to place. I thought you may be interested to see how it worked and come along with me for your first day at work." Sanders gritted his teeth. "I'm definitely interested. However, next time, please don't catch me off guard like that. I nearly burned my hand there on my coffee." Strong Bear smiled. "I will. Where's your wife? Is she ready to go?" "She's in the bathroom. She'll probably be fascinated by teleportation as well." Strong Bear shook his head. "She's pregnant. Apparition is not recommended for pregnant women, as the subject often experiences compression which could harm the baby. I'll send her over via flu powder. Which reminds me, I've brought over a whole bucketful of the stuff. It's next to the fireplace right now. I've modified it so all you have to do is toss it in. You don't need me to activate it. It should allow for a good 6 months of trips from here to Fourth Mesa." "I see. In that case, I think I'll pass on the teleportation. I don't want the two of us separated over there, particularly since we're going to be teaching the class together." "Understandable, Mr. Sanders. We'll do an apparition after she's had the baby. In the meantime, we'll wait for your wife and then flew ourselves over there when she's ready." Both Sanderses walked out of the fireplace together. Strong Bear had preceded them to tell the wizards they were coming. Sure enough, the wizards were there to welcome them, 2Bear in the lead. The man in charge of Fourth Mesa stepped forward and shook their hands. "Welcome to Fourth Mesa. Are you excited to be doing this? Nervous?" Izzy nodded. "Both, to be honest with you, I've never taught before." Melissa put her hand on his shoulder. "I'll be there with you. If you need help, I'll try to back you up. I'm pretty good with kids, as you know." Izzy looked at her. "I sure hope so, because in a few months you're going to have to deal with one." He then turned to 2Bear. "Well, sir, we're here. When's the first class?" 2Bear started leading them through the complex. "The first class is at 10:00 in the Coyote Room of the Dine Center for Sorcery and Shamanism. It's going to be a bunch of 7th graders, 11 girls and 12 boys." Melissa frowned. "Kids going through puberty. That's not going to be easy." "Don't worry about it. One of the things our school focuses on is conduct and good behavior. They should not be very disruptive. If one of them misbehaves, tell us and we'll transfigure him into a chicken for 5 minutes." Izzy stopped in his tracks. "You'll what?" 2Bear explained. "Transform him into a chicken. He'll wind up clucking and cackling around for a few minutes in front of his classmates. It's quite embarrassing and serves as a good deterrent. After he's learned his lesson, we turn him back into a person." Melissa gaped at him. "You turn him into a chicken? You mean those myths of witches turning people into frogs are real?" 2Bear shook his head. "No, Mrs. Sanders. At least not in this facility. We do not turn people into frogs. The choices are chickens, pigs, foxes, and armadillos. The instructor can choose which animal is appropriate given the nature of the infraction." Melissa closed her eyes and drew a deep breath. "That really makes me feel better." "It should, Mrs. Sanders. The policy almost guarantees that you are going to have a well-behaved class. However, if a child does misbehave, just jot down his or her name and we'll deal with it after the class. Now, if you'll come with me, I'll show you to the classroom." 23 students looked at Izzy as he stood on the dais at the front of the room. He turned to his wife, who shrugged. "I don't know what to tell them. How can we describe our whole way of life in a few short lectures?" Izzy rolled his eyes and drew a deep breath. "Hello, kids. I'm Isaac Sanders. This is my wife, Melissa. We're Muggles, supposedly that's what you guys call people who do not have magical ability. Strong Bear has hired us to introduce you to the Muggle world now that our world has found out about yours. What are your names?" The students then went around the room, giving him their names. Several of them were Hispanic. One looked distinctly Mexican. Izzy wondered if he had come over the border illegally. That teleportation trick could easily fool some of the border guards. Some seemed to be run-of-the-mill American. Most, however, were Native American. There were 4 Zuni, 3 Apache, 6 Dine, and 2 from some tribe with at least 6 O's in its name, which Izzy was supposed to associate with telescopes. The students were dressed in what appeared to be the equivalent of school uniforms. The Native Americans were dressed in formal clothing, which seemed to be reserved for shamans of their individual tribes. The Americans and Mexican were wearing what appeared to be matching robes with various symbols embroidered on them. Supposedly, the animals represented Native American tribes, whose names served as homerooms. Izzy jotted down the students' names as they went around. He then recommended that they sit in the same places for the next few days so he could figure out who was who. Shockingly, the students agreed. This was indeed a well-behaved class, or at least a careful one. He then started describing his way of life. Hopefully, that would break the ice. "Well, that's you. Now I'll talk about myself. I live in Prescott, Arizona. That's between Phoenix and Sedona. You know Sedona, the place with those vortices." Several of the students nodded. One actually chimed in. "I can explain the vortices, Mr. Sanders. There's a branch office of this institution there where they sometimes train wizards. The effects sometimes break out your world and manifest themselves as vortices." Melissa stared at him. So the vortices really exist. The student shook his head. Yes and no, Mrs. Sanders. Sometimes they're there, sometimes they aren't. It depends on what the wizards are doing there. Usually, the wizards are careful and don't let anything show. Then again, with the statute of secrecy gone, they might start occurring more often. Melissa whistled. I've got to tell my friends that. They'll be excited. The student shook his head. I'd discourage that if I were you. Objects in these so-called vortices can have strange things happen to them. It could be dangerous. Furthermore, muggles walking around in these magical fields could cause spells to backfire, potentially harming both the muggles and the wizard. It's extremely rare, but it does happen. Izzy nodded. That's good to know, and it may save lives. I'm going to give your house 5 points. If there's anything else you guys know which can help save muggle lives, tell us before we accidentally fry ourselves. The students talked excitedly for a few minutes. When the din had subsided, Izzy continued with his introduction. Less than a month ago, I was working for Blast Cola Corporation. Another student spoke up. You were part of the group that created that disgusting drink. Izzy stared at him. What? You didn't like it? Muggles seem to like it a lot. The student laughed. We don't really like it much. Do muggles have different mouths from wizards? Izzy chuckled. Look at my mouth. Does it look weird at all? The student looked at him. Not really. It looks more or less normal. Perhaps it's an acquired taste. Izzy nodded. Perhaps. Maybe we can try an experiment where we serve Blast Cola a lot in the school cafeteria and see if the wizards learn to like it. The Mexican started speaking. I doubt it. We like butterbeer. Ah, the stuff that we're piloting in the Asu cafeteria. Muggles seem to like that too. However, due to the alcohol content, we can't serve it to people under 21. The students started muttering to each other. Finally, the first student who spoke up laughed. So that's why you're trying to feed us this Blast Cola instead of butterbeer. We're under 21. Good to know we won't drink butterbeer too much around muggles. I suppose we can always enhance the flavor of the cola with those peyote extracts. The what? Peyote extracts, Mr. Sanders. They cause us to have visions. They're often used for religious ceremonies. For some reason, Izzy decided that this was not the time to tell them that most American authorities banned peyote as a hallucinogenic drug. Chapter 55. Ineffective Border Patrol. February 21, 1996, north side of the DMZ Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Choi Yeon-mi hushed her apprentice as she looked out into the distance. There, spread out before her, was the infamous demilitarized zone separating her homeland from the refuge in the south. All she had to do was get across there, and she would be able to blend in with the rest of the population. She had done it several times before the army wasn't exactly equipped to handle wizard transportation methods. It had been South Korean wizards, after all, who had first alerted her to the breach of the statute of secrecy. But she had to be very careful about it, especially with Mr. Wang at her side, who had never done it before. She pulled Mr. Wang to her and pointed into the distance. See that little hill over there? We're going to apparate over there. Grab onto me and get ready. Wang shook his head. I wouldn't, mistress. If I were a soldier, I'd have a patrol stationed up there to have good view of the DMZ. In fact, I'm surprised that this vantage point isn't taken by our own troops. Don't worry about it. I've done it before. Now on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. She willed herself into the void, holding Wang's hand. Moments later, the two of them rematerialized on top of the hill on the south side of the border. Wang whistled and was about to say something, but Choi Yeon shook her head and mouthed the words, "Too close. Now let's head over to that other hill over there." Wang nodded and grabbed onto her again. She apparated once more and brought them over to the second hill. The DMZ was out of sight behind them. Only then did she breathe a sigh of relief. We're safe now. We've made it into South Korea. Wang laughed. That was so easy, no one suspected a thing. She laughed as well. Like I said, those muggles weren't expecting people to do this. Come on, let's head over and catch the bus. Wang's eyebrows shot up. A bus? Won't they ask us for identification or something like that? I doubt they'll accept North Korean currency. And besides, what buses would dare go this close to the DMZ? She grinned, reached into her purse, and brought out a galleon. They definitely won't accept North Korean currency. However, they'll probably accept this. And as far as the bus goes, we're not dealing with a regular bus here. We're dealing with a special wizarding bus, the Ancestor bus. Wang looked at the coin. Is that gold? Ancestors, take me. Where did you get gold? It's wizard currency. It's accepted by wizards all over the world. Where do you think the gold standard came from? Now all we have to do is head down to the road, where the bus will pick us up. The two refugees headed down the hill. Wang frowned for a moment and thought of something. Do you think the dear leader is going to be able to find us? What's more, I suspect our farm is going to be punished if the overseer comes back with an invitation to meet with the dear leader, and we'll have fled the coop. Choi Yon shook her head. I don't think he'll be able to find us. However, we're still going to have to go back at some point. The farm will suffer if we don't. But he's going to demand that we use our abilities for the army to kill people. You heard him. That's why we left, right? Yes, that's why we left. So why go back? She smiled. Because we're going to have to cast some spells to make it so the farm can experience increased productivity even with us gone. The overseer will probably be expecting it now, especially if the dear leader holds him to it. She hesitated for a moment. There's another reason as well which recommends that we return. We tell the South and have South Korean wizards at our side, under invisibility cloaks, when we visit the dear leader to discuss militarizing the wizards. Once we're close, the wizards can assassinate him in a way which will make it look like an accident. As long as they're protected by the invisibility cloaks, no one will suspect a thing. Wang stared at her. That's dangerous. She shook her head violently. I agree, it's dangerous. However, getting yoke of the dear leader off our backs and ensuring a permanent peace is worth the risk. Wang looked at her pleadingly. Can I help? Absolutely. However, we're going to have to get in touch with the southern wizards first. And to do that, we're going to have to reach the road. The two continued in silence through the forest. Eventually, the forest opened up into a clearing with a small roadway running through it. Wang grunted. Where's the bus stop? I don't see any bus stop here. She smiled. Don't worry, my apprentice. The bus will be there. The breeze suddenly whistled through the trees. Wang, curious, headed out into the road to check to see if the bus was coming. He was surprised, however, when his mistress suddenly screamed for him to get out of the road. Wang stared at her. What are you nervous about? There's nothing. There was a loud honk, and a bus materialized out of nowhere, heading down the road. Wang cursed and spun around to look right at the bus barreling down on him. He didn't move and turned to her with a puzzled expression on his face. The bus honked again. She cursed at herself. He was a half-wizard. He could cast spells but not see magical entities easily if he couldn't see the bus. There wasn't any time to lose. She brought out her wand and pointed it at him. Levicorpus. Wang shrieked as he suddenly flew into the air just in time to prevent being hit by the bus. What the hell did you do that for? I heard a honk, but there was no bus. She pointed at the road as she gently lowered him to the ground. The bus is here. You couldn't see it because it's a magical entity. Wang stared at her and started walking towards her, only to walk right into the side of the bus. He rubbed his forehead. What the hell? She ignored him and continued on smoothly. I'll help you on. Hope you like sitting in midair. She directed him around the bus and over to the curb next to her. Meanwhile, the door to the bus opened and a short man looked out at them. Welcome to the Ancestor bus, transportation for the stranded witch or wizard. My name is Shi Sao, and I'm going to be your conductor for this evening. Is it just the two of you? Wang just stared at him for a moment and turned to her. Who said that? The driver grinned and pointed at Wang. Let me guess. He's a squib. He couldn't see us on the way in. Thank the ancestors we didn't hit him. Fortunately, we're prepared for people like him. We'll cast a charm on him so he can see us. Wang grinned and nodded. That would be most helpful, kind sir. And what is a squib? The conductor muttered something and pointed his wand at Wang. Wang's eyes went as wide as saucers as he took in the bus that nearly hit him. Wang apologized profusely for not getting out of the way. The driver shook his head. Don't worry, sir. It sometimes happens with squibs. Wang rolled his eyes. And what is a squib? Choi Yon answered for him. A child of wizarding parents with no magic of his own. It's the reverse of a muggle-born. Wang scratched his head. But I can do magic. Why couldn't I see the bus? The driver frowned as well. Apparently he was confused as well. Turning to Wang, he said, I'm not sure, sir. Maybe you've been cursed in some way. Hop on in and we'll take care of you. The two refugees got on board and the driver took off again. Where to? Choi Yon responded with the utmost seriousness. The Seoul Wizarding headquarters. A lot of interesting things have just taken place, and a couple of serious ones as well. The driver grinned. I should say so. Did you hear the statute of secrecy has fallen and the Muggles have found out about our world? Choi Yon smiled. Absolutely. Chapter 56. Disputed Drinking A. February 22, 1996, Dine Center for Sorcery and Shamanism, Firth Mesa, Arizona, United States of America. Hidden behind his invisibility cloak, Strong Bear watched the Sanders speak to the students. So far, everything had gone more or less as expecting. The students were as curious about the Muggles, for the most part, as the Muggles were about the wizards. The Muggles had never heard about Quidditch or Quadpart before. Both Muggles seemed like Quidditch and wanted to watch a match. Quadpart, on the other hand, was something else entirely. Mrs. Sanders had nearly had a heart attack when the students discussed the exploding ball. Izzy himself had gasped and asked, And kids think this is a game. Don't people get hurt? The Department of Social Services would have a field day with this. The student responded accurately and concisely. Yes, Mr. Sanders. People occasionally get hurt. However, the wizards have lots of good spells for putting people back together. Shaking his head, Sanders recommended that the wizards try out a Muggle game, baseball. The standard Quidditch set had those bats and the little gold ball. He told the wizards that you didn't need brooms for this, and it was much less likely to hurt people than Quadpart. The students hadn't been particularly thrilled that they couldn't fly around. That's when Mr. Sanders got creative. He asked the class to think of a way to change the game of baseball in a way which would work for wizards. He discussed things such as outfielders chasing down fly balls on brooms. The kids, of course, got all excited and started suggesting new rules. It looked like the new instructor had caught on pretty well. Grinning, he left the room and started heading back to his office to deal with the day's latest issues. With the statute of secrecy gone, his job as an Oblivator had been rendered obsolete virtually overnight. Instead of laying him off, however, Two Bear had realized that the people had to learn to interact with Muggles more, and had tasked the former Oblivators to serving as liaisons between the Muggles and the wizards in the area. The Oblivators were already familiar with Muggle customs to some extent, and Strong Bear had already taken the lead in advocating that Fourth Mesa hire the Sanderses. It hadn't taken long for Strong Bear to become president of the new organization. The Muggles knew him from the Sanderses' videos, and he had done yeoman work trying to stop the Super Bowl breach. He was fairly certain that he would have stopped it completely had that damned videotape not made it to NBC. Strong Bear's work had not gone unnoticed. Several of the other regional centers of the Department of Magic, finding themselves with out-of-work Oblivators, had immediately started copying his idea. Radner had eventually updated the headquarters in the 4 towns. Rumor had it that Grand Mugwump Dialanis was even debating making the change to the international headquarters on Atlantis. Two Bear had informed him that Radna was seriously considering inviting Strong Bear to go to the Four Towns and start heading the new Muggle liaison wing. Strong Bear didn't think he was ready for that yet, but he would do his best. He was still lost in his thoughts when he entered his office and nearly collided with a tall man in a suit. The man looked like a Muggle and towered over the 5'5" Two Bear. Strong Bear looked at his boss and at the Muggle in confusion. What's going on here? Two Bear indicated the Muggle. Strong Bear, this is Mark Popovich. He works for the National Food and Drug Administration. Dr. Popovich, this is Alexander Strong Bear Parkman. He's the head Muggle liaison here. Popovich shook Strong Bear's hand. Pleased to meet you, Strong Bear. Full-blooded Navajo, I gather. Strong Bear nodded. Yes, Doctor, although we prefer to be called Dine, not Navajo. I apologize, Strong Bear. At any rate, you may wonder why I'm here. We have heard some disturbing news from some of the wizarding communities in the area. Are you familiar with the beverage known as butterbeer? Strong Bear nodded. I am. It's very popular in our community, and from what the Sanderses have been telling us, it's becoming popular in the Muggle world as well. Have you ever had it? Popovich shook his head. I'm afraid not. I'm not really big on exotic drinks. You should, Doctor. It tastes really good. I'm sure it does, Strong Bear. Unfortunately, I don't have much time, and we have to get down to business. We recently caught a bunch of Muggle children drinking some of this beverage during a party with some wizard children in Sedona. Strong Bear frowned. How old were these children? Don't Muggles have an age limit of 21? Popovich nodded. Yes, they do. However, word has been leaking out that there is no age limit in the wizarding community. Muggle children have been starting to complain that wizarding children can drink before they're 21 and Muggles can't. Strong Bear shook his head. Our rules only apply to the wizarding community, Dr. Popovich. Muggles follow their own rules. We have no jurisdiction over how you govern your community, and you have no jurisdiction over how we govern ours. That's the way it's always been. Indeed. However, the policies we have in place hadn't considered the possibility that Muggles and wizards would be doing something together. In the situation I've explained to you, where underage Muggles and wizards are drinking butterbeer together, who is liable for underage drinking? Strong Bear frowned. I see your point. The wizards would complain that they'd never been told that they weren't allowed to drink, and the Muggles would complain that they were doing it because the wizards were, and they need to be treated the same way as wizards. How did you handle it? We let all of the children off with a warning. The wizards didn't like it all that much, though. What I suspect will happen is that the wizards will just invite the Muggles into their domain and say that their rules will allow the Muggles to drink while in the wizards' domain. This is probably the first case I can think of where Muggles and wizards would be competing over jurisdiction issues. I spoke with a government official about this, and he suggested that I talk to a Muggle liaison officer like yourself. The official recommends that in cases like this, the more stringent rule should apply to both groups. Strong Bear nodded slowly. That makes sense. Unfortunately, it will inconvenience a lot of wizards who do not interact with Muggles and have no plans to interact with Muggles. Why should they suffer because something they wouldn't be involved with? Don't worry, Strong Bear. The rule would only apply to public locations in Muggle territory. Are you familiar with American baseball? As of half an hour ago, he was. As a matter of fact, I am. Good. There are two baseball leagues, the National League and American League. They have slightly different rules. National League rules apply to both teams when interleague games are played in National League parks, and American League rules apply to both teams when the games are played in American League parks. Strong Bear caught his drift immediately. I see where you're going. Muggle rules apply in Muggle territory, and wizarding rules apply in wizarding territory. If that's the case, the wizards should be cited for underage drinking under Muggle laws. And in the subsequent gathering in wizarding territory, the Muggles don't get cited. Popovich nodded. That's what I'm thinking. Does that sound all right with you? Strong Bear thought for a moment. I'm not sure if it will apply to every single case of Muggle-wizard legal issues. However, it's a good start. Is there anything I can do to help? Yes, Strong Bear. Inform the wizards that underage wizards cannot drink outside Muggle territory. Furthermore, warn underage Muggles entering wizarding territory that although they can drink during their visit, they cannot do so once they return to Muggle territory. Strong Bear nodded. I'll do that. It's probably a good thing in general to think about when it comes to Muggle wizard jurisdiction, at least for now. I have one more question, however. What happens with an 18-year-old wizard in Muggle territory? Popovich frowned. He gets cited. Why not? Because wizards consider a person to have come of age at 17, not 21. Anything which requires that a wizard be an adult becomes available when the wizard turns 17. According to this, an 18-year-old wizard is considered an adult and should be able to drink in Muggle areas. Popovich shook his head. That could be an issue somewhere along the line. However, we luck out here. First, since it's Muggle territory and it specifically states the age of 21 instead of adulthood, the 21 applies. Second, Muggles usually consider a person to have reached adulthood at 18. The drinking age is a special case. So what happens if the wizard is 17, 1-2? Popovich laughed. I see you're going to make a good official. You're bright and have the mind of a lawyer. Unfortunately, my time is limited, and I think we've gotten ourselves an agreement here. He picked up his briefcase and shook both wizards' hands again. I hope to see you again sometime. May all our negotiations be this easy. Both Two Bear and Strong Bear nodded. I agree, Dr. Popovich. With that, Two Bear put his hand on Popovich's shoulder. Now, if you'll follow me, I'll show you how to get home. Seconds later, Strong Bear was alone in his office. Damn, he thought. That had been much easier than he had anticipated. Maybe he didn't have to be as nervous about his new position. Chapter 57. How to Teleport a Snake. February 22, 1996, Death Eater safe House England Nagini was hungry. She liked her master a great deal. It wasn't often that she could actually talk to one of these two-legs. Furthermore, unlike most two-legs, her master and his friends were actually respectful of snakes. Several smaller snakes had told her that they were afraid of humans. Humans seem to always have this insane notion that snakes thought of them as a prey animal. That was not true. Most small snakes could not swallow a human, and most of them generally hid when humans came close. It was only when a snake was trapped that he was forced to defend himself. Nagini suspected that the occasional encounter between a human and a cornered venomous snake was responsible for most of the fear humans had of snakes. Large snakes like Nagini, however, were an entirely different matter. These animals could in fact swallow humans whole, venomous or not. Nagini herself was 12 feet long and had disposed of several of her master's enemies. They hadn't tasted all that great, but when you've been living off of meager rodents for a few months, a large meal like that was more than welcome. She was sick and tired of hanging around this house. She had cleared out the local rodent population several days ago and was getting quite hungry. The last time she had been sent on a mission to attack a human, a man named Arthur Weasley, she had not been permitted to eat him. What's more, apparently the human had survived the attack. Her master had been furious when he had found out about this. Nagini shook her head. Had she just eaten the man after biting him, her master wouldn't be in all this mess. Sometimes she felt like she can hear her master talking to her even when he wasn't physically around. She didn't know that this was possible, but it had been happening routinely ever since she had assisted in the neutralization of one of her master's enemies, a woman named Bertha something. Her master had told her something about his soul being embedded with hers, like lovers. A human in love with a snake. She didn't know whether to be amused or flattered. How could a human and a snake breed? She'd lay an egg, and one of the two legs would pop out. At the moment, her favorite two legs was speaking with the short, ugly-looking man in the unintelligible language of humans. She didn't understand what they were saying, but the short man looked frightened, and her master looked very angry. Hope surged through her. Generally, when this happened, her master allowed her to kill and eat the frightened person. About time, she thought. At the rate things were going, she'd have to start chewing on the furniture. Her master closed his eyes for a second, turned to face her, and opened his eyes. She looked at him in anticipation. He called her over. "Nagini, I was wondering if you could do something for me." Nagini slithered over excitedly. Did she finally get her meal? Her hope faded a little when she realized that the short man had left the room. She didn't mind chasing down her prey, but she was very hungry right now and didn't feel in the mood for it. She crawled on her master's lap. "Yes, master, how can I help you?" "It's occurred to me that you haven't eaten for a while. You're probably pretty hungry, I'd expect." Dinner bells rang in her head. "As a matter of fact, master, I am. I finished off the rats in this building several days ago. Do you have more food for me? I hope you do." "Indeed I do, Nagini. A human. However, you're going to have to leave the house to look for him. Would you be up for that? You'll be able to eat rats and stuff while you're trying to find him." Nagini didn't particularly like being tempted with humans only to find herself eating more rats. However, she didn't question her master's orders. "Yes, master. Who do you want me to eat? The short person you were just talking to?" "No, Nagini, not him at least yet. I want you to go after someone who was very mean to me. I want him dead, and you want to eat. If you eat him, we're both happy." Nagini slithered around excitedly. "I'll do that, master. Who do you want me to go after?" "Are you familiar with a friend of mine named Igor Karkaroff?" "I believe so. He is a male, tall, and has a triangular patch of hair on his chin." "Why? Do you want me to eat him?" "Yes, I want you to eat him." Nagini looked at him, confused. "Why do you want me to eat your friend?" "Because he did something I don't like and doesn't want to be my friend anymore. I've asked him for help several times, but he refused to come. He's not a very good friend if he doesn't help, right?" "No, he is not, master." "Exactly. That's why I want you to eat him. I'm concerned that he may be in the process of transforming from my friend to my enemy, and I want him out of the way before he does that. If he's my enemy, he may hurt me when I'm not expecting it." Nagini reared back, horrified. "I don't want anyone to hurt you. Now I'm mad at him. I'll be more than happy to eat him now." "I'm sure you would, Nagini. However, there's only one problem. I'm not sure where exactly he is. I've heard rumors that he's up in the north of England somewhere, but that's it. I'll send you up there so you can look around. If you smell him, go after him immediately. Meanwhile, I'll keep on trying to find him. If I get more information, I'll tell you and transport you over there. You'll be able to eat soon enough." Nagini looked at him. "Does this human know that I'm going to be trying to eat him? He may run away or try to hurt me if he does." "He may, Nagini. That's why I want you to be careful and make sure no one sees you. If he sees you, he may attack you, and you don't want that to happen. Come to think of it, I don't want it to happen either because our souls are intertwined." "I'll be careful. What will you be doing in the meantime?" "Trying to get more information about him and planning on how to take advantage of the fact that the statute of secrecy has been lifted and that people other than wizards now know about our society." Nagini looked at him in amazement. "People other than wizards know about your society now?" "Yes, Nagini. They may try to hurt me as well, so I want to lie low until I've got everything planned out. Once I've got everything planned out, I'll put myself in a position of power and surprise them. If everything goes as planned, I will put myself in a position to make myself the king of the Muggles. I'll also conquer a lot of the wizards who fought me in the past and get rid of wizards with Muggle pedigree." Nagini stared at him. "You're going to be a king. Exciting." "Thank you, Nagini. However, I'm not going to be king if this friend betrays me. Are you ready for your mission? Yes, master, I am. Good. Now hold on a second, while I set up the portkey which will take you to your destination. Nagini watched as her master pointed his wand at a nice, juicy, dead rat which she appeared to have overlooked. He muttered a word. The rat glowed for a second and flopped around. Good, we're all set. Swallow the rat. Once you've done that, I'll activate the spell and you'll be off. Good luck. With that, her master turned back to his scheming. Excited, Nagini slithered up and swallowed the rat whole. The next thing she knew, she found herself flying through the air. She didn't particularly like the feeling all that much. However, it didn't last long. Soon, she found herself lying on the floor of a forest, maybe 50 feet away from a clearing. She figured that the prey would likely be in the clearing. It would be the first place to check, at least. She started heading towards the clearing with one thing on her mind. That one thing on her mind changed about 5 seconds later as something suddenly caught her eye. Rabbit, 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 damn, he got away. Irritated, she resumed her stealthy progress towards the clearing. Chapter 58, Akio Uzi. February 23, 1996, SAS Division C, Headquarters Location, Classified Great Britain. Jacob Gold was impressed with Dawlish. For a guy who was just about old enough to be forced into retirement due to the SAS's age limits, the wizard was doing a bloody good job. Granted, there was no way that the man was going to be able to put a bullet through an enemy's head from 100 paces, or be able to climb mountains with a 30-kilo backpack on his back. However, he was able to use magic to do several of the equivalent tasks with great skill. Take, for example, the sharpshooter requirement. Dawlish claimed that there was a curse which would be able to kill an enemy, and that the victim would be slain as long as he was hit anywhere on his body. He refused to divulge the exact nature of the spell. However, he was able to demonstrate its effectiveness by using the Expelliarmus disarming spell in its place. If the opponent's gun flew out of his hand before Dawlish was killed in the exercise, the opponent was considered dead. Who needed pinpoint accuracy with a spell like that? Dawlish was able to climb mountains not with his feet, but with his broom. As long as he got to the top quickly and stealthily, that was all that counted. The fact that he could carry lots of equipment along for the ride was a bonus. So instead of forcing everyone to carry 30-kilo packs, everyone could get away with 10-kilo packs. Dawlish was the only person who had an invisibility cloak at this point. However, the Exora had asked for more. Jacob soon realized that invisibility was a double-edged sword. The commander nearly ran Dawlish over with his jeep because no one could see him. Several other spells sounded like they would be of good use during stealthy missions. There was the Silencio spell, which allowed for silent tracking of an enemy. Combine that with an invisibility cloak, and things would be really interesting. There was the stealth censoring spell, something which would help with guard duty. Dawlish had once pulled a serpensortia during an exercise and managed to reach his objective while the guard was busy trying to deal with a snake which had appeared out of nowhere. Stupefy was good for incapacitating an enemy without harming him, provided that the person didn't fall off a cliff when he was knocked out. And those were only the S's. A quick relatio would be good at getting you out of handcuffs. Jacob was sure that there were more surprises waiting for their group. The only spell which hadn't worked as effectively as Dawlish had hoped was Pratigo. This spell, supposedly a shield charm, didn't work against bullets or tear gas. Fortunately, the quick-thinking aura had compensated for it very quickly. Akio Uzi. He had then tossed the gun to the man covering him and started shooting jinxes at the enemy as the exercise continued. The opponent was eventually felled by a virtual bullet wound and a petrificus totalis. Virtually everyone in the unit had thought that their group would be invincible and that this pilot program should be spread to other army units. Dawlish had shaken his head at that, however. This group was far from invincible. He explained that although these tricks may work against Muggles, they will likely be countered by wizards. An attack on a magical opponent would be far more dangerous. The only advantage the combined wizard/SAS unit had would be the fact that the wizards wouldn't be expecting an attack using technology. Jacob looked down at the dossier in front of him, which Dawlish had conveniently provided to show what a unit like this would be up against. He had been horrified when he had read the reports on the two wizards and had wondered what he'd managed to get himself into. However, he focused on the positive. Demoralization could hurt performance, especially for an elite soldier like himself. He calmed himself and tried to memorize the information subject: Sirius Black Eigender, maladate of birth, August 11, 1959, current age, 36, alias, Padfoot. Current status, at large. Sirius Black is responsible for killing 12 Muggles and one wizard in cold blood. Without provocation, this evil wizard cast a spell which generated a tremendous explosion. This incident occurred in 1981, well before the recent events which accompanied the exposure of Muggles to the wizarding world. These Muggles were no threat to Black, yet he killed them anyway. In doing so, he murdered an old friend of his, a man named Peter Pettigrew. All that was left of Pettigrew was his finger. Furthermore, he endangered the Statute of Secret, which kept the two worlds separate. The Oblivators had to modify the memories of several Muggles who witnessed the explosion and pass it off as a gas leak. Black was also responsible for betraying Lily and James Potter to Lord Voldemort. See the report on him. Not content with killing one friend, he convinced the Potters to use them as their secret keeper to ensure that they would be safe from the Dark Lord. Black then revealed the Potters' hiding place to Voldemort, who then killed both Potters and nearly killed their infant son. Black was convicted and sent to Azkaban, the wizard's prison, for these crimes. Against all odds, he broke out of Azkaban alone and returned to the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, presumably to finish off the Potter's son, who was then a third-year student at the school. He was caught inside Hogsmeade and sentenced to be executed by Dementor's kiss. What happened after that is still uncertain. Suffice it to say, Black somehow managed to escape from a locked room inside Hogwarts. The Ministry suspects that he is still out there, waiting to finish the job. One wonders how long it will take him to take advantage of the fact that Harry Potter is currently under house arrest for permanently breaching the Statute of Secrecy. Description: Sirius Black is tall and gaunt, with shoulder-length brown, curly hair. He has a thick mustache and a goatee. He has been known to take the form of a dog from time to time. Jacob tried to digest what he read. This Black was a nasty piece of work. He had to be a powerful wizard to change into a dog, break out of jail, and create an explosion using magic. He wondered if Dawlish would be able to take him out. Something didn't seem right, however. What was it? Jacob thought for a moment, and it suddenly came to him. Nigel had mentioned something about Sirius Black, which he had heard from Arthur Weasley, something about Black having been framed by Pettigrew and imprisoned unjustly. Jacob shook his head. Weasley was presumably mistaken. The government knew what it was talking about. Jacob then turned to the second dossier. This one was much longer, and had a note saying that this had come courtesy of an Alastair Moody, presumably another wizard. The first time he had gone through the dossiers, he had been able to make it through most of Black's dossier before losing his mettle. This second one, however, he barely got through the opening paragraphs. This second criminal made Sirius Black look like Mary Poppins. He just prayed that the Ministry was correct, and the man was in fact dead subject. Tom Marvolo Riddlegender, maladate of birth, December 31, 1926, current age, 69 aliases, Lord Voldemort, the Dark Lord, you know, he who must not be named. Current status: at large, though the Ministry claims he is dead, the closest thing to an evil genius to ever exist in the British Isles. Tom Marvolo Riddle is responsible for the deaths of countless wizards and Muggles. He and his band of Death Eaters terrified wizards all over Britain for many years and fought against the Ministry in the Wizarding War. Jacob's hands were shaking by the time he gotten down to the fourth paragraph, and he had to put down the document simply because he could no longer read it. It was better than last time, however, as he'd barely gotten through the second before he lost his nerve. He shook his head. He was a special forces soldier. He took a deep breath and continued to read. There was a scream next to him. He spun only to see Banks shaking in terror. Banks's hand opened and Riddle's dossier fell out. Jacob winced. He prayed the ministry was right. If they weren't and Riddle was still alive, the country was in deep trouble. Gingerly, he forced his way through a report which would likely give him nightmares for a week. Hoping the rest of his enemies weren't as bad, he went on to the next document, a list of terrorists known as Death Eaters. Chapter 59, Snape's Secret Mission. February 24, 1996, Headmaster's Tower Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry Great Britain Jacob Gold looked over the man seated behind the desk. For someone who was supposedly 114, the headmaster looked in remarkably good shape. What's more, the wizard seemed to have kept his wits about him well enough to learn how to use a computer. Many old men found it difficult to learn new technology. Dawlish had explained some of the headmaster's background to Jacob on the way to Hogwarts. It was clear that Dumbledore was widely respected in the wizarding world and that he was an extremely powerful wizard. However, he was a bit of a loose cannon from time to time and often butted heads with the Ministry of Magic. Most of the hopefully untrue rumors that Tom Riddle had returned had been spread by people under Dumbledore's jurisdiction. Jacob hoped that there weren't any problems here. From what he had finally forced himself to read in Riddle's dossier, one of the evil wizard's henchmen may have been hiding under Dumbledore's nose all this time. He had convinced Dawlish to allow him access to Hogwarts so that he could warn the headmaster about this possible threat. Dawlish had balked about it a little, but he had eventually given in. Jacob stood and introduced himself. Headmaster Dumbledore, my name is Jacob Gold. I'm with the British Special Air Services. Dumbledore frowned. Special Air Services? I'm not familiar with them. I'm not surprised, Headmaster. We're an elite unit of highly trained British troops tasked with protecting the country. We're good at reconnaissance and black operations, and we've just started some joint exercises with Aura Dawlish over here. One of my colleagues freaked out during one exercise where Dawlish here fired a snake at him. Dumbledore stole an accusing glance at the Aura, who squirmed a little but responded. Serpensortia, Headmaster. The snake was a garter snake. It was non-venomous, but the opponent didn't know that. I dismissed it once the exercise was over. Dumbledore breathed a sigh of relief and turned back to Jacob. Wizards supporting British Special Forces. Now that would be something to see. You have my full support in this endeavor. Thank you, Headmaster. However, that's not why we've come here. We have reason to believe that one of your staff members may be a wanted man. Dumbledore looked at him sharply. Really? Who? A man named Severus Snape. He gives lessons in potions. He has appeared on lists of Death Eaters. Death Eaters, in case you are wondering, are wizards associated with an evil mastermind known as Tom Marvolo Riddle. There seems to be a major internal disagreement as to whether Riddle is alive or dead. But from what I've read, I bloody hell hope he's dead. At any rate, the Death Eaters are definitely still around. We also believe that the criminal Sirius Black may also be a Death Eater. Are you familiar with Riddle, Black, and these Death Eaters? Dumbledore paused for a moment. A troubled expression crossed the old man's face. Jacob was reminded of the scene in Star Wars where Obi-Wan Kenobi was thinking back to his training of Anakin Skywalker. The headmaster slowly nodded his head. I'm afraid I'm familiar with both Mr. Riddle and the Death Eaters. I actually helped train Riddle in the use of magic when he was younger, before he turned to the dark side. Riddle, also known as Lord Voldemort, is probably the most gifted student to ever graduate from Hogwarts. It is a pity that such power is being used for evil purposes. Jacob was about to bring up Snape when he caught the verb tense in the last two sentences. His face blanched. Surely Dumbledore didn't mean what he said. He had to ask, "Headmaster, I noticed that you refer to Mr. Riddle in the present tense. Do you have reason to believe that he is alive?" Dumbledore nodded. "I'm afraid so, Mr. Gold. I have reason to believe the Ministry may be mistaken here. And even if I didn't have evidence that he had returned, this man's power is so great that he should be considered your one priority until you have his body in hand." Dawlish cleared his throat and shook his head. "Headmaster, you have to understand that the Ministry knows what's going on." Dumbledore interrupted him. "I would hope so, John. Unfortunately, we have among us a witness who saw Mr. Riddle less than a year ago. This witness reports a gathering of Death Eaters and a fully alive Lord Voldemort. Voldemort attacked 2 students from this school, killing one and nearly killing the second. The second is our witness." Jacob stared at Dumbledore. "Damnation. Well, it looks I'm going to have to use all this training I've had. Much good it will do against wizards." The sass man turned to Dawlish, who looked as if he had swallowed something very sour. "John, I assume you've read Riddle's rap sheet. That man makes Hannibal Lecter look like Mother Teresa. This makes it even more important that we deal with the Death Eaters, and do so quickly, getting rid of him first." Dawlish nodded at this, though he didn't seem happy about it. Jacob couldn't tell if it was because the Ministry overlooked something or because the Auror, too, was afraid of this Riddle. If Riddle scared even the Aurors, that would be even bigger trouble. He calmed himself and turned back to Dumbledore. "Is there a way we can speak with this witness? Presumably he's at the school." Dumbledore shook his head. "He's not at the school at the moment, unfortunately. He's under house arrest right now for completely different reason. His name is Harry Potter." Jacob stared at him. "Wait a minute. Harry Potter, the kid who flew his broom during that American football game." "The same. Riddle killed his parents and nearly killed him as an infant." Jacob's mind reeled. Fortunately, Dawlish took over. "Gold, forget about Riddle for now. We'll deal with determining whether or not he survived. Perhaps the witness doesn't remember what happened properly. Meeting evil wizards can do things like that. It's going to take a while to figure out. For the time being, let's get back to what we came to talk about. Snape." Jacob looked at him blankly for a second. "Snape? Oh right, Snape, the Death Eater. He cursed himself. He was an sass man, and he was supposed to be more focused than this." Wincing, he turned to the Auror. "You are correct, John. Thank you for reminding me." To Dumbledore. "Headmaster, I'd like to get back on topic. Severus Snape is believed to be a Death Eater, a supporter of this Riddle. Our agency believes that he is on your staff. Is that correct?" Dumbledore nodded. "Yes, Professor Snape is here." "Do you have any reason to believe that he would associate with the Death Eaters and may be an agent of Riddle?" Dumbledore nodded. "Yes, Mr. Gold. It's because I told him to. He's actually a double agent. He used to be a Death Eater but changed his mind a while back. He is now working for us, reporting on the Death Eaters' comings and goings while outwardly appearing to be one of them. Snape, incidentally, also has reason to believe that Voldemort has returned." Jacob stared at him. "You've got a man inside the Death Eater's inner circle, someone who has access to Riddle if he's come back." "Yes, Mr. Gold." "Would this man be willing to help us plan an operation to attack the Death Eaters and possibly destroy Riddle if he has indeed come back? I would ask for him to join the SAS with Dawlish here, but I would expect that he is busy with his undercover activities and his duties as professor." Dumbledore nodded. "I know Severus very well, Mr. Gold. He is one of the bravest people I have ever met. I can absolutely guarantee that he will be more than willing to alert the SAS and Ministry to Death Eater gatherings." Dawlish broke in at this point. "If he can be trusted, that is. I'm still not entirely certain of his allegiances, Headmaster. Recall that you recently had one professor possessed by you-know-who, and another one be forced to resign when he was exposed as a werewolf. Hell, last year you had a death either teaching defense against the dark arts without anyone noticing. Jacob's jaw dropped. A werewolf? He didn't want to know. Dumbledore glared at Dawlish, who cringed. I trust Severus with my life. If you wish, we can give him Veritaserum and have him prove his allegiance. The headmaster turned back to Jacob. Advise your supervisors that Snape will be more than happy to support your cause. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a dinner to prepare. Both of you are welcome to join in the feast. Snape will be there, and rest assured that he will be able to convince you that he's on our side. Jacob thought about it as Dumbledore escorted them out of the room. A double agent inside the Death Eaters. Quite useful. Chapter 60. Hagrid's Job Offer. February 24, 1996. Care of Magical Creatures Classegwart's School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Great Britain. Hagrid glared down at the diminutive woman. He was twice her height and probably 5 times her strength. Yet she acted as if she had all the power in the world. If I recall correctly, unicorns are a class XXXX creature. I highly doubt that unicorns are appropriate for underage wizards. Don't you agree, Professor Hagrid? All that Hagrid, along with most of the other professors, could agree on would be that Dolores Umbridge's clipboard should be shoved down her throat, her body should be pureed, and that the liquefied remains should be fed to those cats decorating her walls. He couldn't say that, however, without him possibly jeopardizing his job. The woman had been paying close attention to Trelawney of late, which couldn't be good. Trelawney had told her several times that she could not prophesy on command. Hagrid knew this to be true for all seers. Yet Umbridge didn't seem to believe it. He drew a deep breath and tried to steady his voice. Professor, dear old Sleipnir here has been at Hogwarts since he was a foal. He's familiar with the grounds and considers the students to be part of his herd. Take a look now, he's nuzzling Hermione Granger. Umbridge shook her head and jotted something down on her clipboard. I find it hard to believe that this animal thinks that a creature with half his legs is part of his herd. Hermione glared at Umbridge. Virtually everyone in the room started muttering darkly. Hagrid, however, had the perfect rejoinder. Yes, and I often wonder whether human females with half my height are part of my herd. Now sit down and watch me teach. The whole class cheered for a moment, but the cheers wilted as Umbridge cast an evil stare around the room. That done, the High Inquisitor turned back to Hagrid, her face full of fury. Hagrid frowned for a moment. Maybe he had gone too far. He didn't want to wind up in the same position Trelawney was in. Fortunately, there was a knock on the door. Breathing a sigh of relief, he excused himself and opened the door. It was Professor Dumbledore. He seemed quite happy, as if something very good had happened. Hagrid wondered what it was, but refrained from asking. He'd presumably find out with the rest of the teachers. It was most unusual for the headmaster to interrupt a class like this, though. Confused, Hagrid shook his head. Professor Dumbledore, good afternoon. Is there a problem? Dumbledore shook his head. Not at all, Hagrid. I was wondering if you would be so good as to join me in my tower. You have a visitor with a most interesting proposal for you. Hagrid stared at him. A visitor who? A representative of the United States of America. Hagrid's jaw dropped. An American? What's he doing here? How did he find out about me? I don't know, Hagrid. However, I believe you will enjoy what he is going to say. Hagrid shook his head and gestured at the students behind him. Most of them were glaring at Umbridge. However, Draco Malfoy was asking if he used his authority as a member of the Inquisitorial Squad to put Hermione in preemptive detention. I can't right now, Professor. I'm in the middle of a lecture right now. We're doing unicorns, as you can see, and Professor Umbridge doesn't think they're appropriate for children. Dumbledore suddenly grinned. I'll handle this. Since they're going to kick me out anyway in June, I might as well go out with a bang. His smile vanished from his face as he turned to face Umbridge. Professor Umbridge, I'm going to have to take Hagrid for a few minutes to discuss something with him. He has an important visitor. Would you be so good as to take care of the unicorn while the teacher away? Umbridge stared at him. Take care of him. He's a dangerous animal. Dumbledore shook his head. He isn't, Dolors. As the only adult witch in the room, it is up to you to handle the unicorn. However, if you have trouble and need assistance, don't hesitate to call on the students for help. With that, Dumbledore closed the door, blocking Hagrid's view of a short pink woman with her eyes virtually bulging out of their sockets. He then led Hagrid over to his tower to meet his visitor. Hagrid had never seen this man before. He appeared to be a Muggle and was dressed in an expensive suit with an American flag on his tie. The man took one look at Hagrid, and his went almost as wide as Dolor's. He gasped, and finally was able to croak a few words to Dumbledore. Jesus Christ, how tall is this guy? Hagrid shrugged. 11 feet, sir. However, I'm not all that tall. After all, I'm only half-giant. My brother Grop is 16 feet tall. He's not very comfortable around strangers, though. I've heard of several giants who were taller even than that. Dumbledore told everyone to sit down, which undoubtedly was to compensate for the fact that the Muggle was about to collapse into a chair in shock. Gentlemen, allow me to make some introductions. Dr. Roach, this is Rubeus Hagrid, our Care of Magical Creatures instructor. I believe he's the one you've been looking for. The Muggle nodded. Indeed he is, Professor. I must say, sir, he's not easy to miss. Dumbledore chuckled. Indeed, he is not. Hagrid, this is Dr. Robert Roach. He works for the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. He has been sent here on the direct request of President Bill Clinton of the United States. Hagrid nodded. Dr. Roach, welcome to Hogwarts. Is this your first exposure to the wizarding world? Roach paused for a moment while he considered his response. Somewhat, sir. I haven't met many wizards before, and I certainly haven't been in a school like this before. Up to now, the only experience I have with the wizarding world is what I've heard from Radna and Deirdre the unicorn. A baffled Hagrid turned to Dumbledore, who explained. Travis Radna is the American Secretary of Magic, similar to our Minister of Magic. Deirdre is a unicorn which he gave as a gift to President Clinton. She is now on display in the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. Hagrid stared at Roach. You put a unicorn in a zoo. That is a very bad idea, so unicorns are difficult animals to handle unless you raise them from infancy. Roach nodded. That's what Radna told me when we were discussing putting her in the zoo. Don't worry, Professor Hagrid, Deirdre seems to be docile. She was also adopted as a foal. Originally, she was kept in the White House, but she started eating all the houseplants and trees. So she had to go to the zoo. Hagrid stared at him. You're bloody lucky the president wasn't injured. That could have been a disaster. Dumbledore nodded. Indeed, it could have. However, everything worked out in the end. It worked out so well, in fact, that the National Zoo has decided to create a wing dedicated to magical creatures. It will be the first zoo of its kind in the Muggle world. Judging from the interest the American people have in Deirdre, it would give a big boost to the Washington economy. Hagrid shook his head. That's dangerous, sir. I'd advise against it. Magical creatures are not to be trifled with. Some of them have magical abilities which Muggles will not be able to handle. Roach agreed. That is exactly what Radna told us. The president said that we would be able to do it, however, if we were able to hire someone familiar with most magical creatures to be part of this groundbreaking development. A Care of Magical Creatures professor, if you will. Hagrid stared at him. Wait a minute. Did you come to offer me a job? Roach nodded. Yes, I have. Radna actually recommended you by name. Hagrid shook his head in disbelief. I'm flattered, sir. However, I already have a job. I'm a teacher here. I can't leave the school. This school has done a lot for me. Besides, doesn't the United States have a school of wizardry as well similar to this one? Roach nodded. Several, in fact. The most prestigious one is located in the Wizarding Capital District in Massachusetts. I thought so. Why would they come all the way to England to hire me if they had several, possibly more capable, wizards on their own soil. Presumably, they have all of the abilities I have. Roach paused for a moment. Radner has told me that animals like you, and you have a soft spot for animals. Furthermore, Dumbledore confirmed Radner's claim that you have a forest here teeming with unusual animals, which would be interesting to the Muggle population. Hagrid shook his head vehemently. Most of the animals are much too dangerous to be placed in a zoo, especially in cages. Granted, there are a few which may be appropriate. I'd say everything from class Roman 20 down. XXX if you're lucky, and XXXX if they were raised from birth thinking that a human was their mother. XXXXX. Forget it. You don't want a dragon setting fire to and then eating patrons from inside the cage. Roach blanched at that. No, sir, that would not be a good idea. Dumbledore looked at Hagrid. I must say, Hagrid, that although I'm reluctant to see you leave, this is probably a once-in-a-lifetime offer. You may seriously want to consider it. Hagrid shook his head. My home is here, Professor. I owe my life to Hogwarts. Besides, I'm certain that there are more capable instructors in the United. Hagrid suddenly stopped speaking and turned on Roach. Wait a minute. You want me because I'm a half-giant, right? That I'm once of those strange creatures you want to put on display? Roach closed his eyes and sighed. That's part of it, I must admit. However, you would not be part of the exhibit. You would be on the staff. You could talk to the patrons if you wish, though. I'm certain they'd be intrigued by you. Hagrid didn't like this at all and fought to restrain his anger. We are people, just like you, Dr. Roach. We're just bigger than you are. I cannot accept a job where a sentient, talking being like myself would be considered part of an exhibit. It wouldn't be much different from what people did in the old days when disfigured people, or people of a different race or color, were made into exhibits. Roach raised his hands to placate Hagrid. You can always decide not to mingle with the patrons. It would be your choice. After all, the job isn't to mingle with the patrons, it's to deal with animals. Hagrid put his hands on his hips. The answer's no, Dr. Roach. I'm staying here at Hogwarts. Now, if you would excuse me, I've got to go back to class. Roach sighed and stood to leave. I'd better go then. Here's my business card, Professor. If you ever change your mind, don't hesitate to call on us. With that, the Muggle left the room. Dumbledore stared after him and shook his head. That was an amazing offer you turned down, Hagrid. I hope you don't regret doing that at some point in the future. Hagrid shook his head violently. I'm not going to a company which would consider placing creatures like you on me on display. Flobberworms, yes. Unicorns, yes, if they can be raised to accept humans. People, no. Besides, I have a job here. Dumbledore nodded as he led Hagrid back to the entrance. Indeed, Hagrid, you do, and you do a good job at it. Thank you for staying. As he headed back down the spiraling staircase, something occurred to him. He definitely had a job. He had no reason to leave. But what would he do if Umbridge suddenly started dismissing teachers?